Next on Pink Elephant Foxtrot, Loud Hailer. In this installment, we examine the rhyme of history in a segment called Savages Inside the Citadel. Foreshadowing? We don't need no stinking foreshadowing. But there it is throughout human history. The presidential election of 1824 has so many eerie parallels to 2020 and its aftermath that it could almost be mistaken for a prequel. The major difference is that the populist candidate in 1824 was an actual war hero who didn't know the meaning of the term bone spur. By the time the Tennessee state legislature nominated General Andrew Jackson to run for president in 1824, he was already a bona fide myth. In 1814, he defeated the British in the Battle of New Orleans, and his enforcement of a prolonged martial law belied a strong authoritarian bent. Still, Jackson portrayed himself as a populist and was supported by a manipulated and manipulating press. He absolutely disdained intellectuals and elites, claiming to speak for the common man. Sound familiar? In the book The Rise of Andrew Jackson, Myth, Manipulation, and the Making of Modern Politics, authors David and Jean Heidler chronicle the birth of modern political campaigning. The skillful manipulation of the press by Jackson's extremist supporters seems to have served as a blueprint for our modern era of fake news. As the Heidlers put it, that which should have tarnished Andrew Jackson's reputation burnished it. Amazingly enough, it turns out burnish has a rhyme, and the glaze on Andrew Jackson was like primordial Teflon. The fact that he owned scores of slaves pales in comparison to his direct involvement in the ethnic cleansing of Native Americans. His leadership during the Creek Campaign and the Seminole Wars in Florida was brutal, despite the whitewashing it received by the press, but it was only the beginning. In December of 1829, Congress approved the Indian Removal Act, which resulted in the forced death march of 18,000 Cherokee 8 years later in 1838. An atrocity that became known as the Trail of Tears. Of the four candidates in the election of 1824, Jackson won a larger portion of both the popular vote and the electoral vote than any of the other three candidates, but he was still short of the votes needed to win the election. As a result, the House of Representatives enacted the 12th Amendment and held a special election overseen by Speaker of the House Henry Clay. Henry Clay viewed Andrew Jackson and his rowdy, uncontrollable supporters as corrosive and dangerous, and with his backing, John Quincy Adams won the election and became the 6th president of the United States. As you can imagine, the results didn't sit well with Jackson, or his base, or his supporters in the press. And it didn't help when Adams appointed Henry Clay as Secretary of State. Termed a corrupt bargain, it was the big lie rallying cry of another generation. And although it occurred on a much smaller scale, owing to the technology and speed of mass communication at the time, it nonetheless set Jackson's base on fire. The Tennessee state legislature wasted no time fanning that flame. Just 1 year after the election, in 1825, they nominated Jackson early as their candidate for 1828. In another century, a candidate considered to be a corrosive threat to the Republic received a similar early anointment after losing a similarly delegitimized election. The election of 1828 was aptly described as the most anxious and ardent, as well as the most rude and ruthless political contests that ever took place in the United States, but it will certainly have some competition in 2024. Andrew Jackson won both the popular and electoral votes in 1828, and his base was ready to celebrate. At the party after the swearing-in ceremony on March 4, 1829, supporters poured into the White House, damaging art, furniture, rugs, injuring waitstaff, and giving pause to what it meant to court the common man. The event was so out of control, Jackson earned the nickname King Mob. That nickname, and the crown of tyranny that comes along with it, has recently been dusted off. Had Fox News and social media been around back then, Andrew Jackson's base would not have waited for Inauguration Day. The floodgates would have opened much sooner, and the date January 6th would have been followed by a much lower number than 2021.